In this video, we're going to answer quizzes related to AWS. So the first question is, what feature is primarily used to modify an HTTP request or response being processed by API gateway, such as changing an HTTP header or status code? Okay, so integration and stage variables. Option 2 is stages and stage variables. Option 3 is request and response transformations along with parameter mapping. And option 4 is stages and integrations. I believe that is request and response transformations along with parameter mapping. Let's check the answer, and our answer is correct. Let's go to the next question. Which of the following represents the features of Lambda that are used for error handling? So SQS and dead letter queues, triggers and SQS, dead letter queues and destinations, and layers and triggers. So that should be dead letter queues and destinations. Let's check the answer. The answer is correct. Dead letter queues are used to hold messages relating to events or invocations that Lambda was not able to successfully process, preventing the events from their lost. And Lambda destinations can be configured to receive a copy of the function invocation record for failed and successful invocations, allowing failed invocations to be investigated or processed. So let's go to the next question. You have an internal API that you used for your corporate network, and your company has decided to go all in on AWS to reduce their data center footprint. They will need to leverage their existing API within AWS. What is the most efficient way to do this? Recreate the API manually, replicate your API to API gateway using API replication master, use AWS API import export features of AWS storage gateway, use an API definition open API definition file to import your API into API gateway. So the answer should be use an open API definition file to import your API into API gateway. And let's check the answer. And the answer is correct. You can use API gateway to import a REST API from an external definition file into API gateway. Currently, API gateway supports Open API version 2 and Open API version 3 definition files. You can support an API by overriding it with a new definition. You can merge a definition with an existing API. You specify the options by using a mode query parameter in the request URL. Reference configuring a REST API using Open API. Next question is, you have created an application using serverless architecture using Lambda, API Gateway, S3, and DynamoDB. Your boss asks you to do a major upgrade to API Gateway, and you do this and deploy it to production. Unfortunately, something has gone wrong and now your application is offline. What should you do to bring your application up as quickly as possible? So delete the existing API gateway, roll back your API gateway to the previous stage, restore your previous API gateway configuration using an ABS snapshot, restart API gateway for the new changes to take effect. Um, uh, you have created an application using la la la. Your boss asks you to do a major upgrade to the API gateway, and you do this and you deploy it to production. Unfortunately, something has gone wrong, and now your application is offline. What should you do to bring your application up as quickly as possible? Roll back your API gateway to the previous stage. Did he set up staging stages already? Restore your previous API gateway configuration using an ABS snapshot. Restart API gateway for the new change. Yeah, I think let's just roll back. Let's check. Yeah, correct. You can easily restore your API gateway from a previous deployment by selecting a stage that has the last version of your deployment. Okay, let's go next. Which of the following best represents the services that X-Ray integrates with? Amazon S3, Elastic Load Balancer, and Elastic uh, Lock Store, ABS, API Gateway, S3, Elastic Load Balancer, and Lambda. API Gateway, S3, CloudFront, Elastic Load Balancer, Lambda, EFS. Oh, that best represents the services. EBS, EFS, S3 Gateway, ELB, Lambda. So I think it's not going to, yeah, so I think Lambda, Load Balancer, S3, and API Gateway. Let's check. Yeah, correct. AWS X-Ray integrates with AWS Lambda, API Gateway, Load Balancer, and is S3. These services provide X-Ray integration to trace requests and enable trace messages for event notification. Right. As you can see on those services, there are no storage service. So yeah, I think that X-Ray doesn't trace in storage services. So next question is, what is one way that API Gateway can assist with handling legacy SOAP application? Converts the response from the application to HTML. Converts the response from the API to from the application to JSON. Eliminates the need for SOAP applications. Automatically updates the SOAP application to a RESTful. Yeah, converts the response from the application to JSON. Yeah, I think that's yeah, converts it to JSON. Yep. For if your existing services return XML style data, you can use the API gateway to transform the output to JSON as part of your modernization effort. Number 7, which of the following services does X-Ray not integrate with? Yeah, CloudFront. So CloudFront is some kind of caching thing. Okay, good work. Amazon CloudFront doesn't provide integration with AWS X-Ray. AWS integrating AWS X-Ray with other services. Yeah, that's a reference. So let's go to the next question. Which of the following features is used in API Gateway to logically represent different environments or stacks? For instance, development, production, and test environment, enabling you to configure a different endpoint for each environment. Stage. Yeah, that should be stage. Yep. API Gateway stages are used to logically represent different environments or stacks. For instance, development, production, and testing environments, enabling you to configure a different endpoint for each environment. Number 9, which of the following options can be used to change the behavior of a Lambda function without requiring you to update code and redeploy the function? environment variables. That should be the which of the functions can be used to change the behavior. Oh yeah, that should be environment variables. Good work. Environment variables can be used to change the behavior of a Lambda function without requiring you to update code and redeploy the function. Right, so question number 10. What is a best practice to improve the performance of a CPU or memory bound Lambda function? So what is the best practice to improve the performance of a CPU or should be increasing the memory. Okay, so option number 1, including large libraries and dependencies in the Lambda deployment package. Um, Include large library and dependency in TMP. Increasing the memory allocation will improve the performance of function. Yes, increasing the CPU allocation will improve the. It should be increasing the memory allocation. Alright, good work. With Lambda, only the memory allocation can be increased, which will also increase the CPU allocation. This can improve the performance of CPU or memory bound function. Alright, so go to question number 11. Which of the following step functions workflows can be used to orchestrate a long-running workflow that could take up to a year to complete? That should be the standard workflow, right? So express workflow are I think 15 minutes work. So standard workflow is like it should take a year. Yep. Standard workflow can be used for a long-running workflow up to 1 year that run at most once and are non-idempotent. What is the meaning of idempotent? Like pregnant, you cannot, if your wife will only have one child in will only be pregnant for 9 months and it's idempotent during that time. I think that's a way of explaining it. Okay, so next question is you have launched a new web application on AWS using API Gateway, um, Lambda, and S3, right? So you have launched a new web application. Someone posts a thread on Reddit about your application and it goes viral. You start receiving 10,000 requests per second and you notice that most types of requests are similar. Because of this, your web application begins to struggle. What can you do to optimize your application performance? Should be caching. Enabling API Gateway Accelerator. Enable API Gateway caching to cache frequent requests. That's a good option. Migrate your API Gateway to a network load balancer. Change your Route 53 alias record to point to a AWS Neptune. Configure Neptune to filter your API request to genuine request only. I think that should be the caching. Check answers. Yep, since these requests are similar, you can enable API caching and API and Amazon API Gateway to cache your endpoints responses. With caching, you can reduce the number of calls made to your endpoint and also improve the latency of requests to your API. Alright, so question number 13. You have created a serverless application which converts text into speech using a combination of S3, API Gateway, Lambda, Poly, DynamoDB, and SNS. Your users complain that only some text is being converted, whereas longer amounts of text do not get converted. What could be the cause of this problem? Your Lambda function needs a longer execution time. You should check how long is needed in the French cases and increase the timeout inside the function to slightly longer than that. Poly has built-in censorship, so if you try and send it text that is deemed offensive, it will not generate the MP3. You've placed your DynamoDB table in a single availability zone, which is currently down, causing an outrage. AWS X3 service is interfering with the application that should be disabled. Your function needs a longer time. Check. Poly has built-in censorship. So if yeah, I think the censorship. Um, check answer. No, wrong. Your the correct answer is to fix the lambda timeout issues. Review the logs of the API call to find the problem, then change the timeout settings as needed. Amazon Poly doesn't have built-in censorship feature, alright? So noted. Okay, your application relies on a number of Lambda functions. During testing, you would like to make sure you are always using the latest version of of the function. How can you ensure that your application always launches the very latest version of your code? Reference the function using the latest suffix, create a qualified ARN which points to the specified version, publish a new version of the Lambda based on the specified version, create a should be option 1, reference the function using the latest suffix. Right, would you like to you would like to use X-ray to monitor your application which runs on a number of Docker containers. Where should you deploy and run the X-ray daemon? It should be in a sidecar. Let's look for it. X-ray daemon will already be installed in your underlying EC2 instances by default. Um, install the EC2 Docker on Lambda. Install the X-ray daemon on the underlying EC2. Use a dedicated Docker container built for an image with which includes the X-ray daemon. Yep, that is the correct answer. Use a dedicated Docker container. Yep. X-ray provides a Docker container image that you can deploy alongside your application. For custom configurations, you may need to define your own Docker image. Okay, what are the key features of API Gateway when dealing with legacy SOAP application? Alright, so API Gateway converts a response from the application to JSON and provides web service pass-through for SOAP applications. Alright, so that might be the answer. API Gateway converts the response from the application to HTML. API Gateway converts the response from application to XML. API Gateway only supports RESTful application cannot. Alright, so the answer is option number 1. API Gateway converts the response from the application to JSON, which provides web service pass-through for SOAP application. Right, so that is correct. API Gateway can transform the output from XML to JSON as part of your modernization effort. Additionally, when a method request carries a payload and either the content type header does not match any specified mapping templates or no mapping template is defined, API Gateway can pass the client supplied request payload through the integration request to the back end without transformation. This process is known as integration pass-through. Alright, which of the following is not a valid way to deploy your code to Lambda? Write a CloudFormation template that will deploy your environment including your code. That's a valid one. Upload your code to S3 and use a MySQL connection string to connect Lambda to your S3 bucket. I think that's wrong. Zip your code into a zip file and upload it via the Lambda console. That's a valid one. And copy and paste your code into the integrated development environment inside Lambda. Yep, that's correct. So the wrong one is upload your code to S3 and use MySQL connection string to connect Lambda to your S3 bucket. That doesn't make sense. So that is not a valid approach. That's correct. Alright, so your web application is running on Lambda, API Gateway, DynamoDB, and S3. You have recently seen a significant increase in traffic to your website. Right, so the application support team are now reporting that Lambda invocations are being rejected with a 429 HTTP status code, which is the most likely cause of this issue that you would that you would check first? What is the most likely cause of this issue that you would check first? Okay, so you have reached the default concurrent request limit for API gateway. You have reached the default concurrent request limit for DynamoDB. You have reached the default concurrent request limit for S3, or you have reached the default concurrent execution limit for Lambda. I think that's a request related thing, and so that should be you have reached the default concurrent request limit for API gateway. Alright, so let's check. Answer, oops, wrong. The correct answer is execution limit for Lambda. 429. 429. AWS Lambda limits the amount of compute and storage resources that you can use to run and store functions, including a concurrent execution limit, which is set to 1000 per region by default. To request an increased support, since your Lambda invocation are being rejected with a 429 HTTP status code and the quota of API gateway requests per second is much higher than the default quota of Lambda concurrent execution. You first need to check the concurrent execution metrics for your Lambda for your function in the AWS region. Where you see through throttling a service quota increase request can be submitted to AWS once the root cause of the issue is confirmed. Right. So okay. So you work for a gaming company built that has built a serverless application on AWS using Lambda, API Gateway, and DynamoDB. They release a new version of the Lambda function and the application stops working. You need to get the application up and back online as fast as possible. What should you do? Create a CloudFormation template of the environment, deploy this template to a separate region, and then redeploy Route 53 to the new region. The new function has some dependencies not available to Lambda. Redeploy the application in EC2 and put the EC2 instance behind a network load balancer. Roll your Lambda function back to the previous version. DynamoDB is not serverless and is causing the error. Migrate your database to RDS and redeploy. So I think it should be rolled back. You work for a gaming company that has a brilliant serverless application using Lambda, blah 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 blah. Blah. They release a new version of Lambda function, right? So we just roll back to the previous version. Okay. So next is which of the following step functions workflow should be used when you need to orchestrate a short process that normally takes 2 minutes to complete and you require the result of the workflow to be returned after it was completed. That should be express, and it will return should be synchronous express workflow. Yep, synchronous express workflow return the result of the workflow after it was completed. They are designed to be used for situations where a workflow must complete before the next step begins. Confirm successful payment before sending an order, right? So question number 21. You are developing a new application using serverless infrastructure and are using services such as S3, DynamoDB, Lambda, API Gateway, CloudFront, CloudFormation, and Poly. You deploy your application to production and your end users begin complaining about receiving an HTTP 429 error. What could be the cause of the error? You have an S3 bucket policy that is preventing Lambda from being able to write files to your bucket, generating an HTTP 429 error. No. Your CloudFormation stack is not valid and is failing to deploy properly, which is causing HTTP 429 error. No. Your Lambda function does not have sufficient permissions to read the DynamoDB and this is generating the HTTP 429 error. No. You enable API throttling for a rare limit of for a rate limit of 1000 requests per second while in development, and now that you have deployed to production, your API gateway is being throttled. That should be the answer. Yep, check the answer. Yep, that is the answer. When your request submissions exceed the steady state request rate and burst limits, API gateway fails the limit exceeding requests and returns 429 too many request error responses to the client. Upon catching such exceptions, the client can resubmit the failed request in a way that is rate limiting while complying with the API gateway throttling limits. Alright, so let's go to the next question. What is required to configure X-Ray to monitor Java applications running on your EC2 instances? You need to install the CloudWatch agent. Both the X-Ray daemon and the X-Ray SDK for Java need to be installed and running in your EC2 instances. You need to restart your instance. Okay, so the answer should be the both the X-Ray daemon and the X-Ray SDK for Java need to be installed in your EC2 instance. Yep, that is correct. Your application will need to be deployed with the additional code specifying the details so you want AWS X-Ray to capture. This is done using the X-Ray SDK, which provides a programmatic interface for your application to send information to the X-Ray daemon. Once the X-Ray daemon has received the information, it will send the information to AWS X-Ray to be reviewed. This requires both the X-Ray SDK and X-Ray daemon to be installed. Alright, so question number 25. Which of the following storage options can be used to allow a Lambda function to persistently store, retrieve, and dynamically update data? Which of the following storage options can be used to allow a Lambda function to persistently store, retrieve, and dynamically update data? Um, should be in TMP. TMP, right? Check the answer. Nope. EFS. IFS allows persistent storage. It behaves like a file system so files can be open. I didn't understand the question. Which of the following storage options can be used to allow Lambda function to persistently store? Yeah, persistent. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so next question is, you have created a simple serverless website using S3, Lambda API Gateway, and DynamoDB. Your website will process the contact details of your customers, predict an expected delivery date of their order, and store their order in DynamoDB. You test the website before deploying it in the production, and you notice that although the page executes, the Lambda function is triggered, it is unable to write to DynamoDB. What could be the cause of the issue? The availability zone that DynamoDB is hosted is down. Your Lambda function does not have the sufficient IAM permission to write to DynamoDB. You have written your function in Python, which is not supported. The availability zone that Lambda is hosted is down. Should be your Lambda function does not have sufficient IAM permission to write to DynamoDB, and that is correct. Lambda function also has a policy called execution rule that it grants its permission to access AWS services and resources. It needs permissions to write to DynamoDB in this case. Alright, final question for question number 25. What is the correct process to configure X-Ray to monitor Java applications running on your EC2 instances? Restart your instance after installing the X-Ray daemon. Install the X-Ray daemon on your EC2 instances, and use X-Ray SDK for Java to generate the send trace data to X-Ray daemon. Install the CloudWatch agent and the X-Ray daemon in your EC2. Restart your application after using X-Ray SDK for Java. It should be install the X-Ray daemon on your EC2 instances and use X-Ray SDK for Java to generate and send trace to data to the X-Ray daemon. Alright, and check the answer. The answer is correct. To configure X-Ray to monitor Java Applications, you need to install X-Ray daemon on your EC2 instances and use the X-Ray SDK for Java to generate and send trace data to the X-Ray daemon. And you do not need to restart your instance or application, and the CloudWAS agent is not required for X-Ray. We're going to get a result calculating. You pass AWS certified developer associate introducing to serverless computing quiz. It's 88%. All right, so it was supposed to be 100 because I'm so smart, but I didn't make it. So I'll be smarter next time. All right, so cool. Thanks. Bye.